So Dean Withers is going to speak to us for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we will open it up for questions. If you would submit your questions in the chat, that way Colleen Weitzel and I can make sure that we capture all the questions that you ask, and then I will ask those of the Dean, and that way we make sure we cover everything and can have a good solid conversation. If we do not have an answer to your question for some reason, then we will certainly do some research and follow up for you. Again, as I said, this will be recorded and we will be sending it out tomorrow. So just one last final thing, please mute yourselves. And if you're having bandwidth issues, of course, turn off your camera. That sometimes helps. And we look forward to this conversation. So Ben, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And again, thank you all for joining in this community today. I want to start off by thanking you all for the work that you've done.
I'm live with Ben.
We've sent some emails off to you folks so that you can know a little bit about what's happening in the college. But I know that we've been receiving a lot of emails, and some of them are very helpful. But I thought that a conversation where I could share some of the information that I know and you can ask some questions might be helpful at this particular time. So again, thank you for being attentive to those other communications. Thank you for all the work that you've done over this last 6 to 8 weeks to make sure that our students are well served, to make sure that we meet our institutional goals and our mission of providing an excellent education. Without that hard work, without the selfless dedication that you all have put into this, we would not be anywhere near where we are today. And I want to emphasize that I know that what you've done has come at a considerable cost, because you were doing these things in a different form than what we've ever expected all of us to do at a very time when demands on you have been great, personal demands, people that you know who may have fallen ill, taking care of your partners, taking care, many of you, of your children. You're doing this all at the same time. So I want you to know that, I want to assure you that I understand the kind of sacrifices and things that you're doing. What I want to do today is to talk to you very briefly for about 5 or 10 minutes about 3 key areas, and then to see if there are some comments or questions that come up. Just to make sure that we all know how this works, if you would, over in the comments section, why don't you write the unit you're in? What's your department? I want to see that represented. We've got over 100 people now joined us, so just a few of you write in there where you're from so we can see the great diversity of folks that we have. Look at that, English, communication studies, music, lots of people from music. Wow, great, see them coming through. So let's start by talking a little bit about something that's in the forefront of our mind, and that is, for me, what we're going to be doing in the fall. The president sent out a message yesterday where she said pretty clearly, unequivocally, without reservation, that she wants us to see the campus reopened in the fall. I know that there's some daunting aspects to that because I've been serving on one of those task forces that have been looking at how we might be able to do this. This is the Teaching and Learning Continuity Task Force. And I'm on there with Dean Lisa Youngblade from HHS, Dean Jan Nerger from CNS, Kelly Long, who is one of our own faculty members, Vice Provost now, is chairing that committee, as well as Steve Dandino, who's a faculty member in sociology, but also Associate Provost and leader of the Reinvention Center. We've been looking at what we would need to do on the classroom and pedagogy side. The key elements of what we do at CSU, in my view, one of the most important aspects about reopening. And we know that there's tons and tons of logistics that we'll have to address. There's other task forces there that have been looking at research, that have been looking at the graduate programs, that have been looking at work life, that have been looking at the residence halls, and we've been pretty well represented on those committees too. So for example, Michael Carolyn has been on the research and the graduate school committee. Dan Goebel has been on the auxiliary committee, especially because of the important role that the UCA plays in that. Denise Apodaca is on a committee that is, Denise, I've actually forgotten which one that you're on. I'd have to go back and look for a moment.
It's a student recovery.
Thank you, there you go. So we're well represented on many of these committees. We understand that there's a tremendous lift for us to be able to come back to campus overall. But I want you to think about it this way. I don't want you to think as much as we're seeing in the media, as many people are talking about this. This is not an on-off situation. Many people think that it's either going to be a choice between completely remote and online, or we're going to be full-fledged 100% everything just like it was in the fall of 19 on campus. The way I look at this is that it's like a light switch with a dimmer. So we're going to have to slide that scale back and forth about how we're going to offer a blend of remote learning, online courses, and face-to-face in order for this to work. Even in the best case scenario, I would say that we're probably going to be 60 to 70% face-to-face. And that is because we know that we have to address issues of density, for example, in large lecture classes. How can we put 150 people in, 200, 250 people into a lecture hall in Clark if it's completely full? We know that that would not be safe. So what we want to be able to do is to reduce that density. We want to also be able to make sure that we're able to offer those courses for which there is a very difficult to find a substitute for face-to-face learning. This could be something like an art studio course or a laboratory course or even senior capstones. We know it's especially true in our performing arts classes in theater and music and dance. How do you teach those forms in a way that when you're not face-to-face with someone? So you want to focus on those two poles first and then be able to address those many courses that we have in the middle, those with enrollments of 25 to 100. What I want you to take away from this conversation are two things. First is that there's a lot of good people in our college and in other colleges that are bringing their knowledge and their expertise to bear on this issue. We haven't resolved the things that we need to resolve yet. We have a few months before we need to be able to do that. But there's a lot of people who are putting a lot of people hours into thinking about how this might happen. The second is that you as faculty are going to play a crucial role. You have to be prepared for different eventualities. We know that we've learned a lot this spring about teaching remotely. We had many people who've done that many, many times who were expert in it. For many other people, this was their first foray. We all have to be prepared for the eventuality that we may need to provide an overwhelming percentage of our courses online. So we have to think about what we can do better in that regard over the summer. Now, when we're thinking about doing that, I want you to keep in mind that we're here to help support that. We're going to make sure that there's Canvas support over the summer. We're going to make sure that we're working with Tilt so that people can have resources available. We're going to continue to talk with department chairs about how this would work. All these scenarios with that sliding scale would work within each department. This is an unprecedented situation in the history of this university, certainly, and of the country. So we have to be flexible and we have to be prepared. Another thing that we have to be flexible about, quite frankly, is that we know that we'll have some people who, for one reason or another, who will say, I do not think that I would like to come back to campus in the fall and teach in a face-to-face environment. We will be prepared for that and we will be flexible so that we can allow that to happen with faculty and with staff. But at the same time, we understand that it's crucial that we do this work for face-to-face. One of the reasons that it's crucial is that our students expect it. There are many students who learn better, not just in the disciplines that I mentioned earlier, but overall learn better in a face-to-face environment or face issues with technology that makes remote learning difficult, if not impossible. That's why we have to look at both of those aspects. That's why we have to be prepared. The other reason that we have to be prepared to come back for face-to-face is because we predict there will be an enormous budget hit if we don't. This will happen across the United States too. But we estimate, according to one figure that I've seen, upwards of $60 million that would cost the university in lost enrollment, people deciding not to come back if we don't open face-to-face. That's why we have to take every serious effort that we can to see if we can do it. We won't put money in front of people. What will trump us all here is going to be the health of the people, faculty, students, and staff. But we still have to pull out all stops in order to understand what we can do to make this happen. So that leads to the second point about budget. Many of you may have seen the presentation that the president made to the Board of Governors last week. If not, I encourage you to go and take a look at that. That was live streamed. I watched most of that, and I can tell you that the situation that we are facing, that Boulder is facing, that every institution of higher education in this state and across the country is facing is dire. We're looking at perhaps even in the best case scenario about an 8.75% decrease in the number of students, which will translate to a lot of lost revenue. We're looking at states like Colorado having cuts to the entire state budget, but higher education in particular. We have to be prepared for that eventuality. But here's the difficulty. Normally, when we would see budget cuts, we know what we would do. We would look at trying to bring sections together. We would look for efficiencies in administration. We would look for things that ironically that would create larger, perhaps cap sizes in classes or larger section sizes as a way of being economical and saving funds. We can't do that in this environment. We have to actually go the other way around. We have to make sure if we're going to have a safe environment that we have fewer people squeezed into some classes or classrooms. So that means to me that we will not see any kind of decrease in instructional effort in the fall and probably even in the spring. So what we need to do is to think about that kind of paradoxical situation that we're facing in terms of the budget, which parallels the paradoxical situation that we see generally in this kind of situation that we're facing. In most of the times that there is an element that is challenging to an institution, we like to bring people together so that we can share information, so that we can talk through things, so that we can interact face-to-face as a community. But we know that we have to do just the opposite in this situation. The situation that we're in has many of those kinds of paradoxical elements. And another one would be the time frame for making decisions. We all want to have certainty right now. We all want to know what's going to happen next week or next month or in the fall or in the spring or next year. But we don't know those things. We have to wait for more information. And sometimes that information is beyond our control. Whether the virus spreads again, if there's a resurge, what do we know about what's happening on the medical side in terms of ameliorative care or any kind of vaccine that might be available or even testing? So this kind of hurry up and wait thing cuts against the grain many times. So the last thing that I want to say then is about the return to campus. There's already discussions happening about how we can have a slow, phased return, both on the research side and also on the administrative side over the summer. The advantage that we have in the summer, of course, is that generally there's fewer people on campus during the summer. So that gives us some leeway for planning how we might work within office spaces. The other thing that it allows us to do is to have a slow recovery. That is, we're bringing people back in certain spaces and not in others, based upon what their job categories are or what we need them to do. But this approach is crucial for the fall for a couple of reasons. One, it gives us an opportunity to pull in safety and health measures that will make the fall more possible. Secondly, it will help us bring people back to campus that are crucial for planning for the fall. We need both of those things to happen. But even as we do that, and we're primarily talking about staff positions here, though there are some faculty that will be involved, we want to make sure that we maintain that sense of flexibility, that we understand that there are some people for whom returning to campus is a blessing. They want to come back, just like I like being here in my office in front of my bigger screen. I have more of a sense that I can get my job done in a better, more efficient way. There are other people who are just the opposite, who know that they have to care for people, or that they have situations that impact their health, their loved ones' health, that make it difficult for them to come back. So we want to be flexible with both sides. We will not create a situation where people feel that their health is being endangered in any way. We will not create a situation where we're going to expect people against their will to come back here in a short term. So that's my assurance to the staff and also to the faculty who work with them. So I've been talking here for a while. I want to make sure if there are some questions that you would like to ask at this time, let me pause for a moment and remind you to go ahead and put the questions or comments that you might have over here in the chat. Beth, our moderator, will help us find those themes with as many people that we have on here. There's going to be many people who will submit similar questions. And instead of asking them in different iterations, we can pull together and maybe save us some time by addressing the thematic aspect there. So if you have questions right now, go ahead and type them over in the chat. I'd like to see what's on your mind. What are you thinking at this time? Beth, do we have any questions already?
We sure do. And I just want to remind people, if you are having trouble opening the chat, you can simply leave the Teams meeting and come right back on. That did happen to a few folks on Tuesday, but it's not a problem. You can just hop back on and it typically fixes the problem. Yes, we have a couple of questions. The first one is, do we have any data indicating what percentage of our students will return to campus in the fall?
Right now, the budget scenarios that we're seeing estimates that we will have 8.75% fewer students of all types coming back to campus next fall. This is just a guess. I have to emphasize that. It's based on a couple of factors. One, we're looking at deposits for first-time freshmen, and the campus is down about 10 or 11% overall. CLA has, until the last several weeks, actually been running a little ahead of our deposits, but now we're down to about 6-7% below the deposits from last year. We are expecting to see a few people decide to join us. We've extended the decision-making time. It's usually May 1st. It's been extended until later in the fall. We've done that because we expect a lot of people for whom CSU was someplace that they were really seriously thinking about, but they decided to go out of state. We're expecting them to decide to stay in state. We're expecting to see an increase in in-state enrollment. So the 8.75% decline is a guess at this time. I've seen some recent figures that show university withdrawals, that is, people who have decided to completely decide at this point that they're not going to come back, is about the same as last year, which is a pretty impressive figure so far. That may go up as we go through the summer, especially if people hear that we're not returning face-to-face, more people may decide to do a university withdrawal. And I'm seeing figures for course registrations, that is, people who are returning students, that it's about on par as last year. We're not seeing a major increase or decrease at this particular point. But again, that could be because people are making up their minds. Beth, what else do we have? What other questions are coming up?
We have some questions about students returning, and you mentioned that faculty and staff, may have their own health or personal concerns. What about student concerns that make it difficult or impossible for them to return to campus? Will we be able to serve them and their educational needs remotely?
That's an excellent question, and that's something that's occupied a lot of our thinking on this teaching and learning continuity task force. As I said earlier, you've got to think about what we do in the fall as that sliding scale. You got to think about it as that dimmer switch that goes up and down. And we won't be completely on nor completely off. One of the reasons that we won't be completely on is the health issues of the density on campus, but otherwise because we know that we will have faculty and students who prefer to learn in a remote environment for the fall. And it could be because of a variety of reasons. One of them could be a health-related reason. So we want to make sure that there's options for those students. But one of the things that we will want to do in our classes is to make sure in those courses where there are multi-sections, for example, I know that we have like 9 sections of History 151. I was talking to Robert Goodmanstead about that yesterday. We want to make sure that some of those sections are completely online or have a remote component so that the students can choose electively to take those. We need to have that variety and that flexibility built into our curriculum, and that's something that you can do to help.
Have you heard any conversations, Ben, about international students and what kind of support we are offering them?
It's related to what I just said. One of the things that we want to do is to make sure that there's remote or online options for international students, because we know that some will not be able to return, but will want to continue their education. We also know that some things are beyond our control. Right now, the U.S. embassies in many countries aren't open to provide the kinds of documentation that students need to come back to the United States, or if they are coming here for the first time as graduate students or undergraduates, they won't be able to get that travel documentation that they need. So we're going to see that there are people who may want to come to CSU who simply won't be able to do so. We will have to make sure that our curriculum is ready for those folks, again, having those remote options. And we need to think about what support we can provide for those international students who are here already but can't return home. And some of them have issues in terms of financial concerns or issues around those. We've been working with our donors to raise some funds to help our students in that regard. The university has several fundraising opportunities too. That's something that you all might consider contributing to if you have some opportunity there, because that's the financial side that we need to attend to as well. What else do you have there, Beth?
So the next set of questions relate to health and safety and protocols that the university is going to put in place as it relates to cleaning labs, cleaning art studios, providing hand sanitizer, requiring masks, dictating how many people can be in a room at any given time. What kinds of updates do you have around those protocols?
There's been a lot of thought and thinking going into all of those areas too. We have a pretty active group here in environmental health that's been advising the president about those larger issues. Those larger issues would be the classroom capacities, for example. So we've already gone through all the general assignment classrooms, and we know, according to current protocols, how many people that we can put into those classroom spaces. We need to do the same thing for studios or departmentally controlled classrooms so that we know those capacities. We're also requesting additional funds for the sanitizing work that we know that will have to happen in between the classes. And we're thinking about the protocols, what that would entail. So for example, in large lecture classes, even under the less dense environment that we have, how do we get students to come in and out of those classrooms? Do we extend the passing period? Usually there's 10 minutes in between when one class ends and another starts. Do we need to have 15 or 20 minutes? What are going to be the cleaning protocols? What are students going to be expected to do to clean up after themselves or to clean up before they sit in a space? What can we do for even such simple things as leaving a large lecture? Do we have protocols that say that the last seat, the row of seats, leave first, and then we work our way toward the front so that we're minimizing that passing? So we're doing a lot of thinking about that, but there will also be a lot of thinking that you, the faculty, will have to do, because you know, especially those departmentally controlled spaces, those labs that we have in anthropology, the art studio spaces, the areas over in the UCA, other areas where we have that ability, we will have to think about those protocols and what's safe there as well. So you'll play a role there too.
Thank you, Ben. The next set of questions relates to decisions about how we conduct our teaching in the fall. And so who will decide that format, whether it's remote or face-to-face to hybrid? When will that be decided? How do shorter classes, extended time periods, Saturdays play a role? And what kind of support will there be for technology to ensure that we can deliver our classes to the best capability?
Well, let me take that last one first and see if I can work back. There's so many different aspects to that question. I don't know if I can cover them all, but I can give you some basic aspects. But starting with technology, our IT team in the college, I think, has done a super job, just like you all have, to make sure that we had, in very quick order, the technology that we needed to do what we did in the spring. They, for example, prepared all of our computer labs in anticipation of coming back in the spring for face-to-face. They did things there that were related to social distancing. But even as they did that, then we made the decision to close those labs, and they were working on getting hotspots or getting loaner laptops and getting other things that faculty and staff and even students needed in order to be able to function as we did in the spring. So we'll need to continue to do that. One of the requests that we're making through this teaching and learning committee is to have more funds that we can spend in the summer so that we can have additional classrooms that have lecture capture, so that people can lecture face-to-face, but capture that lecture for students who decide for whatever reason not to attend that particular lecture, or because they want to take the course remotely. Right now, we have about 52 classrooms on campus where we can do that, but we want to extend that. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. In terms of the global question of who makes those decisions about how we handle the curriculum, the answer is we're going to have to do this together. We have to do this together because we need the expertise that's coming from the health and safety folks on campus, those people who understand the social distancing, who understand the protocols, who understand what we need to do to maintain hygienic practices. We need to bring that expertise through the colleges and through the departments so that chairs and faculty can make wise and accurate decisions based on those protocols, based on what we understand to be the needs of the students, some of them who need to be face-to-face because that's how they learn best, others who want to have the remote aspect. Same thing for faculty. We're going to have to make a series of decisions that are well-informed, but also very flexible. Let me reiterate this. We will not have a one-size-fits-all model. We cannot come into this situation and have a set of fundamental rules of anything outside the health protocols that will decide how we approach the curriculum and how we teach. We're going to have to do this in a messier way because we're in a situation that doesn't allow us to come up with some kind of top-down managed hard and fast, you have to do it this way rule. We're going to have that dialogue, those conversations, and each of us are going to have to be willing and able to be flexible in the decisions that you make in the way that you teach your courses. We can't rely on the tried and true methods that we used in face-to-face instruction and think that we're going to translate that just over to the online environment. You're going to have to be flexible in the way that you approach your classroom management too, because you're going to have all different kinds of needs in those classes with you, whether it is face-to-face, remote, or in the blended environment. So I'm looking forward to those discussions. And when will they start? They need to start right now. We'll have a meeting on Friday with chairs where I'll share even more information. Your chairs have been phenomenal in the way that they've been interacting together, sharing information across departments, meeting with me regularly as a group, and also talking to me individually. They will be invaluable as we move forward making these decisions. What else do we have there?
Ben, can we just extend that conversation a little bit and talk about the workload that is required to address these many different scenarios? Hybrid versus face-to-face versus online. Is there any literature out there about hybrid teaching? Is there anything to support the extra work that this is going to require of our faculty?
Yeah, there's, in terms of the literature and the knowledge, there's some significant understanding out there. TILT has been a great resource for that. As I said, we are extending our Canvas coordinator to help us understand what we can do within the Canvas environment. You know, there have been people on this campus in our departments that have been teaching online successfully for years and years and years, and we need to use them as a local resource. We did in the spring. We had many people who worked in teams because they were teaching similar classes or because they were teaching sections of the same class, and they shared tips, they shared approaches. It was great to see that kind of teamwork going forward. And as far as the extra work that it takes, we all understand that it does take extra work, as it did in the spring, and it will over the summer. Some of it we're going to have to understand that we're professionals and we need to do what it takes in order to be effective professionals. We need to do what we see in our good conscience that it takes for us to be a better dean or a better chair or a better faculty member. I know that when I was teaching regularly, I did that. I used the summer for my research, for teaching improvements. I didn't do my syllabus until I showed up on campus in August, but I was constantly thinking about that. Now, I also understand that we have folks who teach one class or two classes or three classes. They are not on the salary in the same way that a tenure track person is, or even a non-tenure track person who is on an appointment where you're teaching have 100% and it's more of a salaried approach. You're going to have to attend to that and make sure that they have the resources too. And we're working with our president and our provost to recognize that this doesn't need to be and should not be volunteer work at the same time. that if these expectations are going to be placed on people who aren't on these salaried aspects, that there needs to be compensation and recognition for that. That's something that's in our recommendations going forward on this teaching and learning continuity. I'm pleased to see that other universities are doing that at the same time. So the word is still out on that, just as it is coming to you and letting you know exactly what the resources are going to be available based on the decisions that you make within your departments. Because we're going to have to direct those resources to people who are making those decisions about ways to teach. Again, there won't be a universal decision for everyone that will apply for everyone in terms of this workload, because it is going to fall unequally on different people depending on the approaches that they're taking within their departments about the curriculum.
Okay, Ben, we have two different sets of questions here. Some are about the budget and others are about the reproduction rate of the disease and how that will influence whether or not we have face-to-face teaching, or if you know if there's an acceptable level of infection that will allow us to carry on versus another level that will make us make different decisions.
Yeah, that last one is really beyond what I can answer. I'm not a public health professional and I'm not in a position to be making those kinds of decisions. I have to turn to people like the governor of the state, the president of the university for guidance there. I think that my general precepts as an ethical person is not to want to do anything that causes other people harm. And that's why we've asked people to do what they've done remotely this spring. We need to weigh many different aspects there. And if we do ask people to put themselves in a position where there is more of a situation, we need to make sure that we do everything that we can to mitigate that. That's why we're adopting these social distancing protocols. That's why we're adopting the hygiene protocols. But beyond that, I'm not really an expert to be able to tell you about infection rates or those other aspects. Was there another element to that question that I've forgotten, Beth?
I can't remember if I asked it, but do you know if there will be testing available on campus?
Those are questions that have come up repeatedly. We're fortunate that we're here on a campus where there is actually labs that have the equipment that's necessary to do certain types of testing right here. That gives us a degree of autonomy that other campuses who don't have that capacity don't have. The VP for Research, Alan Rudolph, has been exploring different options, everything from a rather expensive test that if we gave it to folks would allow us to understand if, yes, they tested negative for COVID-19, but yes, you've got the flu. So there's tests available that would be very expensive that provide that great array. There's other tests that are less expensive, that are more limited, and the university is looking at those options in order to determine what would be best for us in terms of testing. I do agree that it's a crucial thing. When people come to campus, I would feel much safer if we knew what we could do in terms of testing and also in terms of social isolation, self-isolation, if people are symptomatic or if they have tested positive. Those things, we're still awaiting some developments. We think that every day, I see every day, there's an announcement of different kinds of tests that are being approved. We still have some work to do before we're able to make some firm announcements about that, however.
Okay, let's switch to the budget. And we've got questions about the recent changes to non-tenure track faculty ranks and promotions. Will those be in jeopardy with the proposed budget? Are we looking at differences in 9-month and 12-month contracts? In what ways will the budget have an impact?
Well, as I said, I see us in the fall in the next year or so needing every person that we already have in order to make sure that we can do the teaching that we need to do. So that's the first aspect. And I've heard the similar things being expressed by the provost and by the president. So that's the first thing, is to reassure folks about that going forward. In terms of the longer term structural aspects of the budget, certainly we're going to have some difficult decisions to make. We've got some, I think, practical good guidance coming from the president that the first thing that we do is that we look at open positions. So we look at those positions across the faculty and the staff that right now that we have no one filling, and we use those in order to address our budget needs. We look at other kinds of mechanisms such as making sure that we cut out every bit of discretionary funding so that we're putting our funding that we have available into staff and faculty salaries, as opposed to other things that we might want to do or normally do with that funding. We also need to look at how we are supporting things like faculty research. Can we, in the short run, cut back a bit on that support through professional development in order to direct the funding toward the staff and the faculty positions that we want to be able to preserve? In terms of changes in the faculty manual about continuing and contract or adjunct appointments, those are the word of the land. That's the law of the land. And we need to abide by what the faculty manual has said. We need to be able to make sure that we can meet those needs with our continuing and contract faculty. So one of the things that we're doing is being very careful about hiring new people into adjunct positions, for example. We want to make sure that we can support the people who are already in those positions. And again, down the road, as we're looking at these difficult decisions, we need to look at enrollment patterns. We need to make sure that we have a healthy recruitment effort and that we are bringing people to our college so that we can show that we need the faculty that we have. After all, the thing you have to all keep in mind, that I have to keep in mind, is that 3/4 of the education and general budget, the big budget of the university, comes from undergraduate student tuition. There is no other college on this campus that produces the student credit hours that serves undergraduates like this college does. And we have to take that argument forward as the university is looking at changes overall that's necessitated by a decline in state support or overall by a decline in undergraduate enrollment. Beth, anything else on those lines?
Yeah, we certainly have some extensions on that. Has any thought been given to adjusting tenure requirements in the coming years? So, for instance, additional work to prep for many scenarios in the fall, restrictions on funding, difficulty doing research in this COVID environment. How does that affect tenure requirements?
The president and provost have already enunciated a policy that provides an automatic extra year for anyone that's on the tenure stream. So anyone who's tenure probationary right now, without asking for it, have an extra year in order to go up. We've looked at everyone that would be going up in the fall. We think that they're all in good shape. So we're suggesting to them that they go ahead and not take that year, but they go up in this time so they can achieve that important milestone of tenure. But yes, we have already put structures in place within departments to have those conversations individually about that tenure expectation in terms of years. In terms of tenure expectations, in terms of what people are expected to do, we have to keep in mind that department faculty write those expectations. They're encoded in your faculty code, in your department code. And that's the place that we would want to look at. I don't see us in terms of the flexibility there needing to make major changes. There is a great deal of flexibility within that. There is ways that we can reward people within that existing code for doing an excellent job, a superb job, a job that is extraordinary on the teaching side, while recognizing that they're doing what they need on that research side and taking that extra year that's been afforded to them.
Okay, our next set of questions relates to technology needs. So how are we addressing, or are we addressing, the technology needs that we had prior to the COVID pandemic? And then how are we addressing them going forward? And that includes things like Zoom licenses to better conduct teaching, as well as technology access for our students who maybe have trouble getting that on their own.
So there's several different issues there. Again, in terms of the platforms that we use and adding platforms, we need to think very carefully about the platforms we do use. One of the things that's coming back that I'm hearing from students over the spring is that faculty have been using too many. I've heard at least of a few students that say, I've got 5 different classes and they're using 5 different platforms. We need to make some decisions about what we are going to recommend for faculty to use. And then once we make those decisions, we need to support them so that it's widely available. We have to understand there's also some other issues with some of the platforms that have been used in the past. Zoom is what's been brought in here. And there were some Certainly some safety issues there about people Zoom bombing or having access to those platforms. If we do decide to use something like that, we got to make sure that all of our faculty, all of our uses of those platforms are following certain protocols so that our classes aren't being interrupted, so that students aren't being harassed. Those are issues that we have to face on both sides. So it's not just a financial aspect, it's a decision about the platforms that we're going to use and support. And again, once we make that decision, we need to stick by it and we need to be able to support it. It's a stickier issue when it comes to being able to support students and the things that they need in order to have access to online environments. That's one of the reasons I think that it's important for us to do everything that we can to make sure that we can safely provide face-to-face instruction here on campus, or at least have an open campus so that students who live in Fort Collins, maybe not in the residence halls, but live on Fort Collins, can safely come into our classroom spaces or our labs or other places like the library and have access to a more robust online environment. It's very difficult for us to be able to proactively identify 23,000 different needs for online access. We have to do things that would provide that kind of access for students so they have a range of choices. And again, if we have international students who cannot come back to the United States, that's even more of a difficult reach for us, because we understand that many times their access to the internet is dependent on family income or the infrastructure in the areas that they live. It's a sticky situation. And one of the best ways that we can address that is, again, to make sure that we have an environment here on campus where people can access the internet, access equipment, access labs here in a safe environment that supports what we ask them to do in the classrooms.
Ben, what conversations is the university having with Pooter School District for those folks who do have children in the school district? That's going to have a real impact what their decision is on how we move forward.
I haven't been part of those conversations myself, but I've been part of other conversations where I've understood that there is a very robust communication structure in between the campus and PSD. It's obviously in the interest of both this campus and PSD to have those conversations, because we know that in many ways we're serving the same group of people. And what happens on one side is going to have an impact on the other. The more that we can collaborate, the more that we can make mutual decisions that allow people both to do their jobs and support their families and provide the education that their students need, the better we're all going to be. This is one of these situations where more collaboration is going to make it better for everyone, as opposed to a series of individual decisions that may seem to be in the short run better for one or the other. And I feel pretty confident that that communication will continue. It will continue across the summer into the fall, as PSD has to face many of the same kinds of decision points that we are facing too. They will be impacted by Larimer County and the public health authorities in Larimer County and the mandates that they put out, just as we are. They will be affected by any surge in the virus. They will be affected by any things that come from the state government, the government's office. So we're going to have to cooperate and collaborate in tandem, make decisions in tandem for the best for all the people that we both serve.
Thank you, Ben. We do have a question about graduate teaching assistants, and if they're out of the country and not allowed to enter the U.S. During the pandemic, or if classes are moved to online, can we still have those particular graduate students?
Well, I think there's a few fundamental things here. It is difficult, if not impossible, for us to pay people who are not performing the job that we've asked them to do. So that's the first question. Is there something that the GTA can do, or if we're teaching remotely and we are, they're a GTA in a remote class, certainly they're doing the work that would be necessary, that would be part of the expectations. So there should be a way that we would be able to support that. But that's the first question, that we have to make sure that there's work for them to do, because after all, we can't take state funds and give it to somebody for no work, no matter what. So we would need some flexibility within the departments to make sure that we can make that alignment. And then I think it would be a relatively easy series of steps overall. But we'd have to make sure. So we'd have to make sure that they can fulfill that first aspect so we can do that follow-on work.
Okay. Is there a sense that a GTA might lose their in-state status if they had, returned home and they've been away for more than 30 days?
That's one that I'm going to have to do some research on. I don't know, in part because I'm not entirely familiar with the way that Colorado determines residency for students. It varies state to state. I've worked in states before where the state was very rigorous about their definitions, and it was difficult for a student who was being declared as being a dependent for a parent or guardian in another state to declare residency. So let's put that aside for now, and let's see what we can learn about that, because that will have an impact on graduate students and undergraduates too.
Okay. Switching gears, can you give us an update on the Clark revitalization?
Certainly, yes. The same Board of Governors meeting where we had the discussion about the university budget. There was a discussion of a proposal that came forward from this campus for the transformation, revitalization of Clark. We put together about a 30-page document. Alex Bernasek, who I think is on this call, was a major force in that document. It was a preliminary program plan that outlined a $123 million approximate transformation project for Clark. And the Board of Governors approved that and sent it on to the state for their evaluation. They did that because, in part, we are asking for about $55 million from the state to pay for about half of the transformation project. And I've got, of course, some mixed thoughts about that. On one hand, this is not a very good time to be going to the state and asking for $55 million because I don't think they have it in their spare change pocket right now. The governor just announced about a $3 billion shortfall in the state funding. So their rainy day funds and other things are going to be absorbed by those basic needs, I think. On the other hand, putting it in now puts us priority for when the state does have funding down the road. And one of the ways that the state may have funding, if there is a federal or even state stimulus package that's aimed at infrastructure in order to get the economy moving again. And the fact that we're there, that we're highly rated, we're the #1 rated project now on this campus, puts us in good stead in case those kinds of decisions that are made. And just to put this in prospect, 4 years ago, when I started talking about Clark, when we started having these broad conversations about Clark, we weren't even on the campus's list in terms of its priorities. But now we're #1. And that's thanks again for the hard work for people like Alex, Bruce, Rhonda, who's been part of that, and all the people who participated in the various groups that we brought together over the last year and a half to talk about the staff, faculty, and even student view about what a transformed Clark would do for the university campus. So at least there's a little bit of good news there.
Thanks, Ben. Let's take the budget a little bit more. I have a couple of questions. What has been the discussion about furloughs versus salary cuts? Is there a date for when the budget will be decided? So when we'll know when those cuts will be determined? And will salary letters be going out late this year?
So let's take the question about the date first and work our way backward. The university has put together a preliminary budget. That's the one that was presented to the Board of Governors. It was preliminary in that we still don't understand yet exactly precisely what the state is going to do in terms of its budget shortfalls. The state government right now, the committees are putting together the long bill, and the expectation is that that long bill will be approved here, or at least being debated at the end of this week. We're at the end of this week, so early next week, and will be approved in either next week or the week after that. Once the long bill is approved and we understand what we're facing in terms of any budget cuts from the state, that will flow into the university's budget scenario, and that will be presented to the Board of Governors, and they meet here early in June. After the Board of Governors looks at that, they will make decisions about the availability of system reserves or other things that they would recommend that we do moving forward. And after that, we will have a firm idea of what our budget would be. So we're looking around, a rough date would be June 15th. We would have 2 weeks then to begin to work on a campus budget to work down through the campus and the department level. then that would lead us to those questions that started to come up earlier about open positions or what we do in order to meet the budget shortfall that we are expecting. So we would be looking at campus reserves or department reserves or college reserves or carryovers that we might have in order to address that shortfall in the short term. And one of the strategies that the campus would look at then is whether to have salary cuts or furloughs. The difference between the two is a salary cut is exactly what it sounds like. That our salaries, our current salaries would be cut by a certain percent, and that cut would be permanent. That cut would impact fringe benefits. It would have impacts on our retirement, on health benefits, everything that's generated as a percentage of our overall salary. A furlough, on the other hand, is a temporary reduction in what we are paid. And the idea here is that we would be asked to take unpaid days over the course of the year, keep our current salary, but we would just be paid less of it because we would be expected to work less. In a salary cut, we would be expected to do our current jobs in its totality. We would just get less funding for it. Now, the president has said that whichever avenue that we go down, the cut or the furlough, equity will be an important aspect. And by that, she means that if we're looking at the holes that we're facing in the budget, and we know that we need to save funds, let's pick a number out of the air, 5%. But the idea would be that everyone would not, and we'll repeat that, everyone would not have a 5% cut or a 5% furlough. Instead, in order to be equitable about it, the folks with the higher salaries would have a higher percentage. The people who are better able to weather the storm, the people who are better able to live in Fort Collins with our cost of living would be asked to bear a higher part of that burden. And the people on the lower end of the salary scale would be asked to have a smaller percentage, or those people who are at the lowest may not have any at all. So those are the differences. You got to look at the furlough as a temporary feature that buys us time. It's a way of making sure that we can temporarily cover the budget holes and make sure that we can meet our payroll and do everything that we want to do without making a permanent decision about what happens. It basically buys us 6 to 9 months or so, maybe even as long as a year, so that we can see if the economy changes. We can see if students are coming back. We can see if the situation changes. And that would allow us the time to make better decisions because we've got more information and we've got more opportunity to involve more people in those discussions, as opposed to making a snap judgment in the 15 days between June 15th and July 1st.
Thank you, Ben. We have a follow-up on the furlough salary cut. Sorry, my voice is echoing here. Are faculty going to have the opportunity to have a voice in this furlough versus salary cut decision? Furloughs should, of course, be equitable, considering CLA salaries tend to be low compared to other colleges and peer institutions. And then is it possible to do a mix and match of furlough and salary cut depending on the job category?
So the question first about faculty input. This is the importance of shared governance. This is the importance of faculty council to be able to express preferences at that campus level about approaches that faculty would like to take. My understanding, and this is generally the way that other universities have approached this, that the final decision is a matter of the Board of Governors, because that's where the state legislature has invested these kinds of fiduciary responsibilities in the Board of Governors. They're the ones who have final say. And then on the campus within the president, and in our case, her advisors. So it's important that there's faculty input to the overall aspects of this, that these elements that you're concerned about are expressed through faculty council. But the ultimate decision, the ultimate authority to make those decisions will be in the Board of Governors. And then the Board of Governors will decide exactly what leeway Fort Collins has, or Pueblo or Global has, in making decisions within the array of options that the Board of Governors makes available to them. Was there another part of that that I didn't answer, Beth? I can't recall.
Yes, it was about possible to do a mix and match of furlough and salary cut depending on the job category.
Yeah, again, I think that those kinds of decisions would be made at the Board of Governors or the president's level. They could come in and say that they give the campus that option. My understanding is that the campus itself will make decisions as a whole, that those will not devolve down into the college or department level decision making. And it's quite right. I think that's possible because we're going to have, what we don't want to have are different solutions for different colleges, because that itself can develop inequities within that process, that some faculty might have a stronger voice in one college or another. And we want to make sure that we have equity in that decision making, so that we don't have those pockets of isolated things where people have figured out something that just helps them and that helps the institution.
Okay, I know we're coming up on our hour, but we do have a few more questions, so let's try to see if we can get through them. Are there any conversations about making sure we maintain the same academic and professional expectations from our students taking our courses, whether we're online or face-to-face?
I think that's vital. I think that's certainly what we need to do. That's what we do when we set our syllabus. For example, we need to be able to all express the need for the same kind of academic excellence. We need to provide that same kind of academic excellence in our classrooms, even though, as I said, we have years and years, generations of understanding what that looks like in a face-to-face environment. We need to be able to have a same sense on our part of the delivery that we're doing. And there certainly needs to be messaging that comes from the college, that comes from the provost, that comes from the president, that those are the expectations too. After all, we're charging, this gets a little controversial perhaps, but we're charging the same tuition for those students, and they have the right and we have the responsibility to deliver the same level of academic excellence in any environment, despite the circumstances.
Thank you. We did have a question about an outbreak. So suppose it's determined that an asymptomatic faculty member is the source of an outbreak that infects many students. Is there a liability risk to that faculty member?
That's getting beyond my training. I'm not a lawyer, so I would really feel out of my league right now giving you a kind of an off-the-cuff answer. I can tell you that what I would do if a situation like that came up, I would consult with the provost and the office of general counsel. And that's something that what we can do beforehand is to be prepared for that by going forward right now with questions before we start in the fall. So I appreciate the question. It's one that we're going to have to do some research on so I can give you a better answer.
Okay, thanks, Ben. And then a question about discussions regarding phased or early retirements.
Yeah, that's another option that has been presented by the president on her list of things that we might do as a campus as we make these decisions. It's continued to be a point of conversation in dean's meetings and other places. What hasn't been established yet, though I understand there's a lot of work going on with general counsel and with HR about what that would look like. There obviously needs to be protocols in place, because the last thing that we want to do is to make anyone feel like they're obligated to retire because they are of a certain age or whatever. We want to make sure that people understand that they're valued as employees and that they can continue. On the other hand, we want to make sure that if there are protocols, that they are fair to everyone involved, that they're transparent, that people know what they're getting into. And that's why it's important that general counsel and HR put those protocols together and roll them out consistently across all the units at CSU, so that everyone has the same information at the same time, so that we can have the same kinds of conversations with anyone who's interested voluntarily moving forward.
Okay, Ben, our last question. Do you have a sense of the priorities of the Board of Governors as they prepare to make these big budgetary decisions?
I have not sat on the Board of Governors, so I'm not one that can state what's going on in the individuals' minds. I can tell you that they're charged by the state by looking out at the the best interest of the institution, the faculty and the students and the staff. And part of that is looking at long-term aspects too. They have to be able to manage short-term decisions, but those short-term decisions have to lead to the long-term health of the institution and our educational mission, the way that we serve the state as a land-grant institution. So that, to me, as a lay person and someone who's not ever served on a board, that would be my approach. Let me stop for a moment. I know we're a little bit over time, but I think, Alex, are you still on here? You've been a faculty rep to the Board of Governors. Would you like to address that question at this time?
I don't know that I have any particular insights into all of the individuals on the board, but I think, Ben, you're right. The big thing is the fiduciary responsibility. And the board tends to be more conservative and more business oriented. They tend to see things in those ways. If you listen to the board meeting, or if you haven't, go back and listen to it, and you'll get a sense of the types of things that the board members are saying. But hopefully the presidents and the chancellor also have input into what's going to happen, and that there's some balance that comes out of it.
So thank you, Alex, for that. Let me end now by thanking you all for taking this time to chat with me. I appreciate your questions. I can see where your concerns are coming from. I'm happy on one hand to say that there's a lot of good people who are thinking the same things as you all. Many of the conversations I've been in, whether it involves other deans or private conversations with department chairs, with members of the faculty, with students, people from across the university, a lot of those conversations have been in parallel to the things that you're bringing up. So there are a lot of caring, talented, well-meaning people who are at work trying to provide answers. Some of them I'm pleased to say that we've been able to anticipate. So that's why I'm able at this time to answer some of the questions that you've already brought up. There's others that you brought up that we need to continue to work on. The main thing I want you to take away from this are a couple. First is that we need to do this again once the Board of Governors meets. I know it'll be over the summer, but I'm more than happy to have a town hall like this to address your specific questions or your more general concerns once we have that more detailed information. That leads me to the second thing, is that there's still a lot of things that we don't know. There's a lot of things that we don't know that will impact you as a person, that will impact you as a professional, that will impact the way that you interact with your colleagues within your department or within college, the way that you will be able to meet the needs of your students. We will need to maintain the same kind of spirit that we saw in the spring. That is, it's an emergency situation. We've got to be flexible. We've got to make decisions that are in the best interest of all of us. We have to maintain that same kind of sense going forward. Otherwise, when we're confronted with things that we don't expect, then we'll never be able to meet them. And that's the final thing I want to say. I want to congratulate you again. I want to thank you for what you've done over these last 6 to 8 weeks. It's been moving to be able to see the response that you have brought forward. It's been moving to see us come together to do the things that we needed to do. So I've got to stop here because it's too moving. But thank you all for what you've done. I look forward to further conversations. Contact me via email if you have individual questions that I've not been able to address. Look forward for another conversation in the future. But again, thank you for what you've done. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to put some resources in the chat, and we will have this available for video viewing for you later. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.